All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April edition of Microsoft 365 Meetup for Government. Very happy to have you here for all of our new and returning community members. Just want to go through a few administrative announcements before we dive into tonight's session. So if you're not familiar with this Meetup community, this was founded to help promote professional development, networking, and learning for folks interested in Microsoft 365 and its application within government and other public sector scenarios. We have some fairly basic community standards we want everyone to be aware of. Please be respectful and professional, considerate to other members. Please do not share information that's not yours to share. You're not authorized to share in this forum. And certainly everyone here, while we may work for Microsoft, government agencies, or other companies, we're all here in our personal capacity as individuals. So please just keep that in mind. I would like to thank my community co-organizers, Andrew Kagan and Andy Oak from Planet Technologies. Without them, this meetup would not be possible, so want to appreciate their strong support and collaboration for this users group. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Nick Giard. I'm a program manager with Microsoft, but this session really isn't about me. It's really about our community members and the topics we're covering. So as we go into the session, if you're not familiar with Microsoft Teams, and it actually looks like I need to update my screenshot here because we keep changing the UI. However, feel free to use the chat feature, which is located through a little chat bubble icon, or use the raise your hand feature, and we'll happily unmute you and allow you to ask your questions throughout the session. If you need any other assistance or help, please use the chat to get the attention of one of the moderators, and we'll be happy to try to assist you this evening. Before we introduce our presenters, did just want to call out some of our friends over at 365 EduCon have their upcoming session June 12th through 16th here in the Washington, D.C. area, and we're very interested in inviting everyone from our meetup who wants to participate. So definitely feel free to check this out if you haven't been to 365 EduCon before. It's a great event with a lot of sessions, many of which are very well tailored towards folks who have an interest in government and Microsoft 365. And if you have any other questions about that, feel free to put that in the chat, and happy to reach out to you and follow up with information about 365 EduCon. So for tonight, our main event, we want to introduce Aaron Guilmette and Darryl Kegg, who are presenting around Microsoft 365 administration inside and out. These are literally two of the guys who wrote the book on Microsoft 365 administration, and certainly, in my experience, have been some of the go-to folks for questions about Microsoft 365, of which I personally always have many. So Aaron, Darryl, thank you so much tonight for joining us, and over to you guys.
All right, thank you very much. I'm just getting ready to bring my content up, so let me know when it is visible.
We got you, Aaron.
Yes, success, awesome. Well, so as Nick mentioned, my name is Aaron. And I've actually known Nick and I've known Darryl for quite some time. Darryl is actually one of the first people I worked with at Microsoft on a project eons and eons ago, it seems. And since my time at Microsoft, I've moved on, and I'm actually now at Planet, hanging out with Andy and Andrew and the other really talented and awesome people here. So for a second, I'll just talk about myself because that's one of my favorite things to do. And so you can see some cool stuff about me, or at least stuff. I spent just a little over 8 years at Microsoft between consulting and sales, and then program management, working in the fast track area, helping customers adopt and onboard various Microsoft 365 technologies. Worked a lot with Exchange Online and Identity, and eventually took that role and moved into being a team specialist. So focusing on Microsoft Teams, whether it was the collaboration side or the telephony side. So any of that stuff is within the bounds of stuff that I purportedly know about. And So, part of today is really just talking about some of the changes that we've had in this particular book. And I just wanted to put it out there, as Nick had mentioned, I think Andy had mentioned as well, feel free to pop questions up in the chat or raise your hand, and Darryl and I will be happy to talk about whatever it is. And with that, I'm just going to go ahead and flip it over to Darryl for his introduction.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Darryl Kegg. I'm a program manager in the Fast Track Center at Microsoft. I actually spent the last 10 and a half plus years in MCS. Worked with a variety of customers from the commercial to the federal space. My background was largely identity, security, and exchange back as far as the 5.0 days, as well as MIM and FIM and some other fun products. So when I first joined Microsoft, it was about the same time we launched Office 365. We were just departing from the BPOS platform. For those of you that are familiar with BPOS, we were making that shift over to Office 365. And my goal was I was going to be doing lots and lots of Exchange migrations, and in about the first, week or two of working with one of the customers, somebody said, "Hey, we need somebody that knows FIM," and I raised my hand, and from that point on, I was the identity guy. So all the projects that I was involved in were really just Office 365 Exchange migrations, but I was doing all the heavy lifting as far as the identity workloads went. So back in the early days of Office 365, you had logins, and that was about it. And you had DirSync, and that was about it. And so we had a lot of challenges with customers who were multi-forest and multi-domain and Exchange resource forest and things like that. So I kind of established myself as the identity go-to guy in that space. I got ring fenced into that quite a bit. But yeah, I've been at Microsoft just a little over 11 years now. It feels like a lot more than that. I'm sure Aaron can attest that 8 years feels like 20.
For sure.
It goes by quickly, but in retrospect, it certainly feels like a lot. The great thing about Microsoft is that there's plenty of different roles within the organization to do. My biggest regret, I think, at Microsoft is going to be that I won't get a chance to do every job that there is. There's some great roles out there, and I've spent 10 plus years in MCS, so I think my time that I can spend in other roles inside the organization is probably limited. But I thought Fast Track was a good next step. As a program manager, I'm involved a lot in helping customers kind of really use those things that they've purchased as part of their license plans. It's kind of like those 2 free oil changes you get when you buy a car. You definitely want to take advantage of those. So Fast Track's really kind of positioned to do that. From a personal level, married for 25 years, got 3 kids. I enjoy, outdoors and 3D printing, woodworking, that kind of thing. I've been involved with computers since as far back as I can remember. Apple IIe's, VIC-20s, the TI-99 4A. So kind of in my happy place, but it's sure been a lot of fun, and you get to meet great guys like Aaron along the way. So we opted, from a book perspective, just to give you a quick background on the book, because I know Aaron's been involved in both the 365 books. I actually tech edited the first edition of this book. I don't even remember the date. And several years later, I reached out to the publisher and said, "Where's the second edition?" And they said, "Would you like to write that?" And I said, "Sure." And they said, "Okay, we're going to need that in about 3 months." And I said, "Can I phone a friend? Because I can't create that much content in 3 months." And so I teamed up with Aaron and Ed Fisher and another gentleman, and we did the first edition of the book and had a fantastic time. I say that sarcastically.
I think one of the great things about writing a book is everybody gets, you get your turn to like draw the topics you like. So everybody immediately gravitates to, to 1 or 2 things. And we all tend to like, the same 1 or 2 things a lot of times. And then you get to draw straws for who gets to do the rest. And one of the cool parts about that, actually, I think really the only cool part about that, because writing about stuff you don't really enjoy as much as other products isn't awesome, but you really do get to experience the product in ways that you had no idea existed even. And it's really an exercise that I think helps you, develop and become more well-rounded when you're trying to really understand content in a way that is, both deep technically, but also in a way that you can relate it to other people. So, whether it's, any of these books that Darryl and I have written together, or other books and other projects I've worked on, I think those are, that's really probably one of the greatest, aspects about it was being introduced to that, to that way of, really exploring all of the facets of a product, not just the ones that are applicable to a particular role or a particular job or even a particular task.
Yeah,
you
as we
certainly
hit
get it.
that,
Oh,
Darryl,
sorry, Nick.
before just hop in. No, Nick's got his hand up, so I'll help out by saying, Nick, what's your question?
Yeah, so Aaron, you mentioned that several of you wanted to write about the same topic, and there were some. So what was the topic that everyone fought over, and what was the topic that no one wanted to touch?
I think most of us wanted Exchange because it was really familiar. So we were all comfortable with, some level of identity, at least the amount of identity necessary to kick up an Office 365 tenant. We're all comfortable with licensing. Maybe not so much the selling and all the SKUs, but definitely how to administer it and how to assign them and manage them. All of the administration side. And I think those are probably the easiest topics. The ones that people really shied away from were SharePoint and Skype. The previous edition, and then even to some extent, SharePoint and the Teams telephony portion of this book.
Don't forget Yammer.
I've tried.
No, and I was going to kind of just append to what Aaron had mentioned about, the great part about writing the book is that you get that opportunity really to go deep, to kind of see things from a different perspective. The other thing is, you really don't realize just how much you don't know about a topic until you've got to tell someone everything about that topic. Our day-to-day, right? Our day-to-day is there's a lot of muscle memory in the things that we do, with regard to Teams or to SharePoint or to identity. And you can kind of get, I don't want to say in a rut, but it's muscle memory. So you're having the same conversations time and time again. Why should my UPN and my SIP and my SMTP match? And then you'll get questions out of left field that you never ever thought of and hadn't had a conversation about in 50 customer conversations. And getting to interject that stuff is a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, that's totally it. I mean, before I think before even our last run at this, I had administered, a handful of SharePoint things. Everybody knows, I was at that level, like, 6 or 7 years, or I guess 7 or 8 years ago, at that level where everybody starts, where you know enough to be dangerous. You can provision a site or two, and you can maybe apply a theme or a template or create a list or something. And then all of a sudden you find yourself thrust into, tell me about the term store, or how do you connect BCS to something? So you really just expand your knowledge there in that area. So and like Darryl said, it kind of led us to, how we got introduced to the second book also kind of leads to how we happened upon the third book. It's been 5 years since the last time we did this, and a lot has changed in Office 365. And the overall suite. So the last time we did it, it was really
Microsoft 365.
Right. That's it. That's where we're going. When we did this last time, it was about Office 365, and so really the collaboration components. And Microsoft pivoted and has really been bundling everything together for an all-in-one experience that includes everything that was previously available in the Office 365 stack, and then the EMS, the security components, so everything that is now called Defender something, as well as Windows. So one of the reasons we wanted to write this was how we can really start incorporating a lot of those things, those pieces. Darryl mentioned before, a lot of us really focus on the same areas and kind of get stuck in muscle memory, but then you get this need where all of a sudden you have to deploy new things you haven't done before. So for a lot of folks, that comes in with with Azure AD premium pieces, whether it's group-based licensing or it's conditional access. Those are things that that even 5 or 6 years ago didn't even really exist. But now they're part of what everybody needs to do. It's kind of like the table stakes for being able to be an administrator in the environment is understanding those things.
Yeah, it's great to be able to actually pivot and change the conversation and talk. Once upon a time, again, you could stand up a tenant and there wasn't a whole lot from a security standpoint. And like Aaron just mentioned, we have Microsoft Defender for everything now. So having those conversations, it's certainly nice to be able to incorporate those in the planning and thought processes that are involved in the book. So as you go through that as an administrator, now we're touching on everything, right? I don't think we're going nearly as deep as we want to on a lot of these. I know in the first draft of the book, I don't know if you remember this, Aaron, but we reached a certain point where the publisher said, "Whoa, you've given us like 1,600 pages and we wanted to stick to 1,000. We need you to cut back about 30% of your content in all of these areas."
And we're like, we're not even half done yet.
Yeah. How do I take back 30% of what I just said and it still sound coherent? Right. So it was a labor of love, but it was frustrating in the sense that we couldn't dive as deep as we really wanted to on some of the topics. So being able to come back for a second time, right? It's that Bad Boys 2. We were able to get back in there and actually have more conversations and take all those things that we learned after the first iteration of the book and use those as part of the conversations to talk about the endpoint and security and again, like Aaron just popped up there, the bullet of those best practices that have evolved since the first version of the book for the different workloads.
Oh, for sure, yeah, and and then obviously there were products that we that have been retired, we'll say. So Skype is no longer among the living. And we have moved on to Teams, being that all-encompassing collaboration and phone system product, a development platform, a communication and collaboration platform, and a full-on telephony product. So trying to figure out how to incorporate something, condense 20 years of IP PBX, know-how into 5 or 6 chapters and everything you need to know to connect Teams to the outside world, and make calls. That was that's one of the, I think that's probably the single largest addition to this book. It would be the switch from Skype to Teams and really pivoting to make it a broader piece.
Well, and one of the things that sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I was just going to interject. One of the things that I really, really like about the Inside Out series is if you take the book and you read through it and just look for the gray highlighted sections, right? The cautions, the inside outs, the notes. There's a lot of really good information that's tidbits of info that are buried in there that come from all that experience of working in the field and working with customers and stepping on landmines and realizing what you can and can't do, right? How do I change my tenant name? There's a reason we say pick a name and stick with it. So when you go through the book, pay attention to those cautions and those notes and those inside outs, because there's a lot of really good relevant detail in there that comes from oopses. It's not just a oh, and by the way conversation. It's the customer called and said we did X, and you go, oh, okay. And I'm going to make that a note in the book because I want someone else to learn from their mistake, because we can't recover from their mistake, or it's a painful recovery from their mistake. So
right,
pay attention.
My history teacher used to say to never worry that you've lived your life in vain, because you can always be used as a bad example. And a lot of those inside outs are exactly that. It is, you have to make this decision right the first time, because you might not get a do-over in a lot of areas.
Yeah, so there's a lot of really, not only the inside outs and the cautions and the notes, but if you look at those great highlighted areas, we really try to call those out, because those are if you remember nothing else from this page of the book, remember this. And then of course the rest of the subjects in the book are really predicated on, expanding coverage and advanced topics and experience that come from, the years and years and years between the three of us that we've had across all those workloads.
Yeah. So one of the things I was really excited to see in this was how you were able to add some of the advanced hybrid things with AAD Connect and now Cloud Sync that again, when you and I started doing this forever ago, those were those weren't even fathomable. We were a lot of the hybrid stuff was kind of making it up as you go along because the product group haven't even developed it. But now there's support for a lot of really great advanced scenarios that we didn't even have access to 3 or 4 years ago. So learning
Right.
how to join multiple forests together or multiple exchange organizations together, those are really valuable topics, especially now. For a lot of organizations, all the easy stuff has been done, right? Everything,
Low-hanging
all the
fruit's gone.
all the easy work of getting to Office 365 or Microsoft 365 is done. So now a lot of what we see in this, in environments, whether it's commercial or public sector, most of my experience, like Darryl's, has been kind of all over the place. And I've had a lot in public sector, and it's a lot of statewide agencies, going into a larger centralized tenant, or people who are in that boat going the other way and divesting. So it is a lot of digging holes and filling them up, and going between those two types of environments, and or mergers and acquisitions. Trying to figure out how to get there from where you are can be difficult. So we go into some of the things that are helpful along the way to help you achieve those things.
Yeah, and you mentioned AD Connect and Cloud Sync. One of the things that I tried to do in the book is, the Cloud Sync's relatively new, right? It's meant to be a replacement for AAD Connect, but in the public sector space, we all know that's going to lag behind a little bit. So there are things that are A, more complex, and B, just lagging behind in the public sector space that you can't necessarily do with the best of breed, latest and greatest that's out there. What I tried to do with the Cloud Sync content was really just highlight some of those things. Everyone, when you talk about Cloud Sync, will say, yeah, but you can't do this, and you can't do this, and you can't do this. It's not on feature parity with AAD Connect. Yep, I'm a huge fan of AAD Connect. It's MIM under the covers, and I'm a MIM guy. Love MIM. I can talk MIM all day long. But Cloud Sync, people go, oh, it's not the same thing. And at the end of the day, it's a transition. So I tried to put some examples in there of ways that you can do things with Cloud Sync that you wouldn't necessarily think that you could do, or someone might say, oh, you can't do that with Cloud Sync. You've got to stick with Connect. And then, of course, if you flip the script, if you think about the public sector space and a lot of the big EDU customers and GalSync, right? GalSync's been around for forever. It's like Microsoft Access. There's going to be customers using GalSync. And so I tried to include, again, more content in there about how you deal with AAD Connect and Cloud Sync and getting users to the cloud and merging them with contacts and making sure that all those divestitures and mergers that you've done and all those separate gals, that you can keep those in sync, because at the end of the day, people have to still be able to work, right? So there's tidbits of that sort of stuff in the book as well, and hopefully people get the sense that as they go through it, okay, I've got a couple of options here, right? I can go AD Connect, I can go Cloud Sync. If I do those, what happens if I run into X? And that was one of the things that I really tried to focus on in the chapters that I did, was just how to toe the line, but still work in a way that you're going to be able to support your end users and keep your business running.
For sure. And I apologize for the eye chart that this slide is going to be, but there is so much. Yeah, I see Darryl zooming in there, but there is so much new stuff in here that because we really rethought a lot of it. What are some things that, again, from our experience in the field, what are some things that people should have thought about? Whether we are in consulting services or wherever, what are things that should have been thought about before you put your first bit of data in the platform? And so this time we were actually able to really talk a lot about governance. So we have an entire chapter dedicated to governance topics, like what are some of the knobs and dials and controls you have available to you? How should you plan those things out before you start consuming the service? I mean, you can backpedal and you can put stuff in there afterwards, but in a lot of ways, it is it's a little bit more difficult to close the barn doors after the animals are on the way out. You end up smacking things, and it's generally not as awesome. So if you are reading the book, the chapters on governance and planning happen very, very early, so that you can make those decisions before you're totally committed to how you're deploying. So I just have a whole list here of a bunch of stuff, and we can talk about all of them. I'm just gonna keep on clicking my finger here. There's a lot, but some of the stuff that we really tried to bring into this with that pivot and that feature focus on security and compliance. So we're talking about governance. We talk about compliance manager, which is important for a lot of customers in the public sector space, being able to track your compliance across various controls. The new Secure Score feature. So I worked on Secure Score forever ago. So I contributed ideas to it and was responsible for developing some of the pieces, maybe about 7 years ago. And it was always the separate thing that you had, and it ran in these scheduled jobs against your tenant. But now it's it's an integrated part of the security story, right there, available in the Azure portal. So being able and security portal and compliance portal, so you're able to see it and get contextualized support and help and guidance along the deployment way, the deployment route. So we've already mentioned some of the EMS stuff, Defender, new stuff for e-discovery. So this covers the core e-discovery that most people are familiar with, but it looks way different than it did even just a couple of years ago, with all of the new cards. And I gave some good examples on how to structure things, how to get the most out of it. So there's so much stuff in here. It is it's really hard to fit on even a dozen slides. So Darryl's already talked about Cloud Sync and some of the advanced Azure AD stuff. We did some stuff on Azure automation. So
I was going to say, hey Aaron, this is going to sound scripted. Didn't you also write a book on automation?
I did. I actually have, yes. But but really,
tell us about it.
maybe that's a topic for another session. But the idea that when a lot of customers are transitioning from from an on-premises environment to Microsoft 365, there's that idea, well, I still need this server to run scripts on. I have these daily batches or these jobs, or, so you still end up needing another server, even though your data center's in the sky. So Azure automation is really that, kind of that one of those things you can use to help take those tasks that you had a utility server sit in the back room for, and transition them to some sort of a run book, or scheduled job that doesn't necessarily require you to keep an on-premises server anymore.
So there's a question actually in the chat, Aaron, and I'm not sure.
Oh, sure.
It's actually, so the question is from Christopher. We know about Microsoft Learn and Google and ChatGPT, but what were some other resources we use to help better understand the topics? I'll let you go first, because I'd love to hear your answer on that one, actually, which is why I brought it up.
For folks that follow my blog or other things where I write a lot of this stuff as well. Most of my stuff actually, most of my deep knowledge actually comes from Learn, but it's Learn in combination with a customer, request or a customer help. Hey, a customer says, what's the best way to do whatever? And whatever it is, whether that's, how do I create a label and apply it to everything in Outlook? How do I make sure that this attribute is populated for all my users as they get synced to Azure AD? Any of those things, it usually starts with a customer question, and then either looking at at a lot of Learn materials or docs materials as they were called just a few months ago, and figuring out what tools are in the tool belt for us to be able to use, and then really spending time to figure out the best repeatable and supportable way to do it.
Yeah, and the reason I kind of gravitated towards that question is because, from the Boy Scout mentality, right? Always being prepared. I don't know that I would feel comfortable writing content about something that I didn't know at a 500 level deep, right? Like, somebody asked the question about who raised their hand for different parts in the book. I did not raise my hand for Teams because I know this much about Teams. I don't want to know a whole lot more about Teams. I know enough to get by. I used to have a rule. I didn't like the Microsoft products that started with S, so I wasn't a SharePoint fan. I wasn't a Skype fan. I had to change it now to S and T. But in all seriousness, I don't know that I would want to write about something that I wasn't already deeply technical and knowledgeable about. And so yes, learned to a small extent, but I think all the stuff that I gravitated towards and the stuff that I authored were really those things, like to Aaron's point, where I was involved kind of neck deep with customers, working on issues, solving problems, essentially leveraging what I learned by just putting my head down and going through. We have access to Azure. We can set up labs anytime a customer, when we were in MCS, a customer had a problem and we didn't know the answer. It was incumbent upon us to go and actually build a lab and reproduce that problem and figure out the issue and help the customer deploy it. So the next version of the book might just be 100% Chat GPT, in which case we won't have to have this conversation. But for now, it's the experience. I think there's a lot to be said for leveraging that.
Yeah, that's really it. Is just leaning again on so much of that experience. That's I think one of the benefits of a book like this is because Darryl and I have done it for so long, we know most of the things that can go wrong because they've happened to us. It's so funny to look through the list of errors for AAD Connect. Because there are now pages that reference all of the various error codes, and I can almost for every one of those error codes name a customer where I have encountered that one. I had a customer just a couple of days ago that ran into the delete threshold error. Like, what does this mean? Oh, well, this means that you tried to delete too much stuff at once, and here's how you fix that. It's just from having had it happen.
But the question was, were they angry because they hit the threshold, or because the threshold preventing them from deleting more stuff than they wanted to delete? Right? I mean, it always just two sides of that coin. There's the threshold to prevent you from deleting more than 500, but then you have that customer that's about to delete 2,000 and can't, and they're angry that you prevented them from deleting too much. So which one was it?
It was the former. I think it was a bit of both. They deleted way more than they anticipated they were going to delete. They were angry that it hadn't gone through, but it ended up being like 30% of their users got swept into the bucket. So it was great that protection was there to be able to help save some bacon. Some other, having been at Microsoft for a long time, one of the other resources that Darryl and I had access to that not a lot of other people do is engineering. So there are actually things. There are things in the book that, especially around SharePoint, the SharePoint migration tool, for example, that weren't available to actually write about. So when I wrote that section last year, SPMT didn't support SharePoint 2019, for example. So I worked with engineering to be able to learn how to use it with SharePoint 2019. So some of those resources, unfortunately, just aren't available to everybody else. But Darryl and I were able to benefit from, and I think we always have been able to, from knowing enough people that if we didn't have that answer, we could find the person who wrote the code and get the answer.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that too. Years ago, I was working with a customer and they were having some issues with AAD Connect. It was one of the early versions. And I reached out to him and said, hey, I'm having this problem. I can't do X. And it was Andreas. He was the program manager for AAD Connect at the time. And he said, well, hold on, there's another build I want you to try. And he gave me the URL to a drive on his local workstation. So it was, that new from engineering, which was great. Tested that out and it worked. And then, of course, I had to wait for it to go into production before the customer could actually use it. So it was one of those, yes, we can fix it, but the customer's gonna have to wait for that to be a release version, and we're 6 weeks away from that. But having that, as Aaron mentioned, having that interface with engineering really is key. And the other thing I'll share that I remembered, and it's one of my favorites, is there was an email thread. I don't know how many places it went around, but it was probably a week old, and it finally made its way to me. And it was a conversation about some complex identity scenarios and multi-forest and multi-tenant and exchange resource forests times 5. It was a state agency that I'm sure Aaron knows who I'm talking about. And it was about whether or not you could do a certain thing. And finally, somebody said from the product team, just ask Darryl. I know he's done this for a customer, because engineering couldn't answer it because engineering had worked in a vacuum in terms of their labs. So they knew what the standard deployments looked like, but the extra fancy ones were outside of their experience. So it was funny to see, just ask somebody in the field because they'll know better than the folks that wrote it. But again, that access to engineering is huge.
It is, yeah, and that's and I think that's probably one of the biggest benefits of a book like this. Really, is having been there, we have all of those things in there that either that is inside stuff that engineering hasn't released to public yet. I think I put a diagram in there in the book that is part, it's been expanded, I think a little bit with a couple of new products, but really the foundation of how like Office 365 groups connect to every part of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. It doesn't exist anywhere else outside. I had to go ask somebody in engineering if I could use it. That's that was one of I think one of my favorite additions to this book.
Do you see Mike Lanham's question in there, Darryl, Aaron, about compliance manager?
I
will let Aaron answer that one because he's the CM guy.
Okay, great.
So as far as I know, there hasn't been any formal ask for that. I think it would be really, really, really great if it did. I know a handful of people who worked in compliance, so that would be something that I would I think I might actually kick back to them. But that idea, one of the ideas that I like there is not only linking to other tools, but also being able to link to like in the case of oh my gosh, the CMMC. Thank you. I had to sit there and think about it. Yeah, like when it comes to like CMMC controls or other industry regulations, having something in Compliance Manager that would link to that and say, this is the relevant control that this thing affects. That would be splendid. It just doesn't exist quite yet. There are some references to some of the controls, but nothing as far as going to to a whole lot of other tools yet. But I would like to see that as something that the product group adds.
So Aaron, I've got about 2 more minutes. I have a hard stop, but Scott Brewster actually asked a question about, did we notice any significant difference between publishers and how they work, and would we use the same publisher again? So I worked with the same publisher both times on both volumes of the book. Aaron, however, has worked with other publishers, so he's probably better suited to answer this question. Okay. I will, though, before you answer, I'll throw my 2 cents in about working with publishers. It's a challenge. They have there's lots and lots of it's a challenge. There are lots of people involved, right? There's lots of cooks in that kitchen. As a technical person, it's great and it's easy to put a lot of stuff down on e-paper and send that off. And you have non-tech folks looking at it going, yes, that's the right font and that's the right number of pages and you have the right number of call outs. And then it goes to a technical reviewer who says, I need you to explain what a DIT file is. To which I respond, if you don't know what a DIT file is, put the book down and find something else to read. And then, of course, after that, you also have just that formatting, how to phrase things. So for me, the experience was it was great until we started getting edits back. So if like Aaron is a machine when it comes to writing content, if you can get 5 or 6 or 7 chapters submitted out of the maybe 10 or whatever you have to do, and then you can take your time for the last 2 or 3. At some point, those 5 or 6 or 7 are going to come back to you, and you're going to have to stop what you're doing and review and resubmit, and you kind of lose that train of thought. So you don't want to slow roll the thing. You want to try and just slam as much of that content into their face as possible, so that they've got something to do, so that they don't slow you down. But at a certain point, right, the train hits that uphill grade, and then it slows down, and you're having to do all those reviews. It's a very interesting experience. I would definitely do it again. After the first time, I said, I know I want to do this again. And then after doing it again, I'm like, yeah, now that I've got the hang of it, right, I've cut my teeth on it. But it is interesting. So I'll throw it over to you, Aaron, because I have to drop. But I think your experience is a little different, more books, different publishers. So yeah.
All right. So from my experience, I've enjoyed working with Pearson. It is, so Pearson and Microsoft Press is who puts together the Microsoft Inside Out series. There's a lot of stuff I really like about them. They use they use Word templates, so it's most of the time it's pretty easy to work with. So you can you're creating all of your content in Word, and everybody turns on change tracking, and there's all of the familiar tools, so that the writing experience is usually pretty good. But just like Darryl said, when coming into the edits, it is really difficult to because just like that shift from working in like consulting services, if you go from like consulting services to support to sales, those are all different brain muscles that you use, and it's a much different process, how you do something brand new versus how you fix something that used to be working but it's not working anymore, and the customer insists that they didn't change anything, but we all know the customer lies. And then you have the sales hat, which is a totally different set of skills that you're trying to manage. And so when you're in the midst of that process, you're in like content creation mode, and you're trying to get as much stuff down as possible. And then somebody comes back and asks you like this little nitpicky thing. Did you mean to use the word "is" here? And it throws you, and
yes, and at a certain point you realize whatever. If you don't like "is," just take it out. I'm not going to do this 400 times.
I can't imagine I can't tell you how many times I hit accept all changes, and I'll just fix it from there if I don't like it. And so that perspective, all publishers are hard because you're in that mode of having to continually context switch between writing and reviewing. Am I reviewing for a technical person? And you have and I mean, honestly, as a content creator or even as an engineer or any of those things, a lot of us don't like to be questioned. And it takes you have to have a certain thickness of skin to be able to deal with people asking you if you said the right thing, or if you're correct, or offering information. So it takes a lot to get into that mode where you're ready to to be able to accept criticism from somebody. I think working at Microsoft was I think Darryl alluded to it earlier. One of the great things about working there is you actually get to learn very fast how much you don't know, which changes your perspective on how smart you think you are. So taking criticism becomes a lot easier once you work at Microsoft for a while. Working with other publishers, I've also worked with Pact. Their process is it's very similar. Write stuff, send content out, let somebody else review it. You have with both Pearson and Pact, there's technical reviewers that are reviewing the technical content accuracy, making sure the screenshots match, or that they haven't been made out of date, or that you didn't skip a step when you're explaining how to do something. Such publishers have that, and then there's also language editors who are checking grammar, voice, tense, all of the traditional things that that an editor checks. So sometimes trying to marry those things is a little bit difficult, depending on who you're working with. both with Pearson and with Pact, I've worked with people whose primary language isn't English at sometimes, which so adding a language barrier sometimes makes it more difficult. I haven't really found it insurmountable with either publisher. So
hey,
is the tech
Aaron?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's Andy. We've got Frank. Frank raised his hand. Andrew, is he able to unmute? Or Frank, if you can put your question in the oh, there we go. Yeah, we got you, Frank. Go ahead, man.
I'd like to go back to that compliance question about so compliance to me is kind of broken into two areas. Well, there's a third area now with the data governance stuff. One is obviously with inside compliance manager, but then the other side is Defender for Cloud. So if you are looking for more of the infrastructure related compliance and so on, go to Defender for Cloud. You'll actually find the information there for your environment. But most importantly, all of this still runs off of Azure policy. So if you take a look at Azure policy, you'll figure out the things that you then can measure. So I just wanted to point that out because Microsoft seems to kind of kept the Microsoft 365 compliance away from the infrastructure compliance. And I hope that changes in the future. So everything's in one place and visible by all out there.
Yeah, one of the great things about using such a broad term like compliance is it's able to mean so many different things to so many different people in so many different contexts. So I totally agree. I hope that it becomes united in some way. Yeah, sometimes I joke about like Teams. Teams is one of those things that also suffers from that. You have a group of people called, colloquially called a team, who are then part of a Microsoft team, which is inside the product teams, and that stores their content on a SharePoint site with the template team site. So it becomes, meaning, the contextualization and understanding where something fits, and and what we mean when we actually say compliance, I think falls into that as well.
But now I have a real question. Do you like the name Purview?
Not really. If you're going to ask me if I like that, it's not my favorite name.
It was a joke. It was a joke. Don't dig.
Oh no. But well, the thing that probably gets me most about it is it used to be a product name, and we've now turned a product into a brand, which makes it hard, right? To do you mean the old Purview product, or do you mean the new Purview umbrella? So. There's something from Nick here. Do you feel okay? So Nick's question here that he posted when he sees from organizations have traditionally organized their IT departments around individual products such as Active Directory, SharePoint, etc. Do we feel that there are any logical groupings for Microsoft 365 administration? And then in your experience, you prefer a model where it's just one team, where everybody does it all, or more of a role/component? That is a really, really big question, and that's actually a difficult question, especially as all of the products are getting to that point where they are so interconnected. So like a Microsoft 365 group is a really great example. Is that an identity object? Is it a SharePoint object? Is it a Teams object? I mean, if you create a planner plan, it creates, it can create a group. So is a micro, so what exactly, who administers that object? So I think in a lot of areas, I think teams that are looking to administer Microsoft 365, I think everybody needs to have an understanding of like a solid understanding of all of the products and how they work together, even if they're only specialized in SharePoint or only specialized in Exchange or only specialized in Yammer, whatever it is, because their product they're specialized in touches so many different areas. I think it's important to develop a specialization so you can be the go-to person on that particular topic, but really needing to understand those connection points for your product into other people's things. So even in like in my current role, We have, we have a variety of different teams, whether it's, an infrastructure team, or we have, a collaboration team. Well, so in a recent project, we had to administer teams information barriers. So where does that fit? What is that product? It's a security product, but it's not in the security realm necessarily because it's part of Teams. It only really applies to Teams and chat and some SharePoint things. But it creates an Exchange address book policy too. So is that an Exchange problem? Is it a Teams problem? Is it so many of those areas I think now are going to just continue to require more integration between your teams. And I think I've seen a lot of organizations going towards, the combination of generalists and specialists. So they'll have, people who are really strong, usually in identity and security, because that is really the underpinning of everything in the Microsoft 365 stack. And then people who understand the, how do I do SharePoint site development, or how do I do those things? And then, but establishing, building really good relationships between those teams so that nobody feels like something's getting thrown over the wall at them. I'm just looking through the chat here. I think Scott had a question. Is the tech changing too quickly for books to be relevant? I've actually wondered that myself, but I still like the smell of books, so no. I mean, realistically though, a lot of things, it is still, I think there's still a lot of room, and I think a lot of runway for content. I think there's features that really haven't changed. So as a content author, I can kind of look down the road and I can see this is something that's going to be here a while because I know how it interacts, or I know how it underpins a lot of other things. So as a content author, I can say, this is something that's going to be a feature. It's going to become, it's going to become a radio button. It's going to become a knob. It's going to become something like that. This is something that's going to stay a core feature, and it's probably going to, exist in this manner for, 10 years or 15 years, or even the entire life cycle of a product. So I think there's definitely a need for both longer form content that lends itself to this foundational type of learning, and then whether it's video or blog type of content that is more feature specific or more feature focused or nuanced for a particular situation. Because the thing is, I write both kinds of content.
And then Aaron, we're coming up on the hour here. It's Andy just popping in. It goes fast if you've got a couple of other slides. Well, there you go. And I've put that link in there as I knew we were coming to the end, and we can open up the floor to there's another hand up, and we can still take questions for as long as you're willing to stick around. But if you wanted to close up with anything, I just give you the flag to do that, and then we can just roll from there.
Oh, I'll take. Looks like Andrew has his hand up. I can go ahead and I'm happy to answer that.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for the great presentation, first and foremost. Well, since you're the only one standing, Aaron, you get double praise, I guess. I was just kind of wondering, I mean, this is quite insightful. And I mean, there are lots of kind of inside out, I think, advice that, people should, take. And you guys mentioned all sorts of gotchas and things that came from experience in the field and stuff like that. But it seems like, the cloud systems such as M365, they often need to be administered at a very large scale. What would you be kind of your advice how to approach, I guess, management at scale?
Management at scale is always a really great question. And it really when I think about it, I'm always like, how do I do it for 5 people? How do I get this working? But then the very next question that I ask myself before I even give a solution to a customer is, how do I make this enterprise ready? How do I scale this to be able to, be like a Ginsu knife and work the first time, every time for everybody? And that's just kind of, that joke shows my age there. But I think some of the things that we talk about in this particular book really focus a lot on enterprise scalability and enterprise readiness, especially when you talk about things that you can enact through Azure AD Connect. So I'm working on a project right now for a customer where we are using AAD Connect to actually change values of accounts, as they age out or as certain properties change, to be able to process them at scale. So as the service desk is making their changes and doing stuff, service desk across all these different agencies and all this, at this particular state government, as they make changes in their environment, those get picked up and they get sanitized and formatted correctly and then pushed into production, so that at that level we have 40 something agencies that are administering their own items. So it's kind of broken down even further, but we have one central point that is performing administration and performing transformations on all of these things, so that all of it gets to Office 365 in one way. So automation is I think is a real key component to scale. So learning how policy management works, whether it is like retention and compliance policies, learning how things like mailbox plans work, so you can make the same settings. Understanding what a company's or organization's business processes are is I think critically important to understanding how to scale, to know what things need to be set for everybody, so you can look for ways in the service to be able to apply those changes with, as we used to say when I used to write exams, the least amount of administrative effort. So, that's really the only way I think to achieve scale, is to understand your business problems and to then spend time understanding the tooling well enough to know where you can control those knobs and dials to make those bulk level changes or those policy driven changes across the org, so that you don't have to go touching as many objects.
Well, thank you. Great answer. And I love how you talk about solving the problem for, 5 users and then figuring out how to scale it up and make it reliable, repeatable, and automated. So I think that's that's the key.
I was just looking at Frank's question there in your follow-up. Entitlement management at scale, access packages and access reviews are definitely the direction to go. So connected organizations, so those types of things. So I have a lot of I actually have a bunch of stuff on my blog where I talked about connected organizations and how to use those with access reviews. I think that is actually a really great way to help skin that cat if you're into doing such things. But the idea that instead of having people administer individual users, I need to add this person to a group, I need to grant them a license, I need to do whatever, instead of doing it that way, kind of flipping that script on its head and saying, what is an access package is a policy driven way, and a connected organization is a policy driven way, where an end user can say, I'm from organization A, I need to access a resource in organization B. I can go to the self-service portal, sign up for this, and then be granted the access to it because I'm with a trusted organization. That's another really fantastic way to handle automation and things at scale.
Aaron, I just a quick question, and maybe it's a point I'm making, going back to the question that is tech too fast for the written word? And I'm a book guy too. I've got a Kindle, but it's dusty, and my books are not. I love the feel of a book, but in reading your book and glossing over some of those gray areas that you were talking of, where you go to, aren't we learning principles and different ways to think about Microsoft 365 and some problem solving clues that make it applicable to technology that's coming down the road, and you learn some lessons throughout the book? At least that's what I got, in a way of looking at things, and with enough legacy technology that sticks around, that you still need to know these quick tips and workarounds and things like that. But it's just a different way of critical thinking that you learn reading this book.
I think so. I think that's a good call out. As they say, there's nothing quite as permanent as a temporary fix. And I think a lot of these things, go that, like when I sit here and I look back at, at this edition, at the previous edition, and even the one before that Darryl and I took over, a lot of the core concepts around identity management and, or exchange, or, and some of those types of things, those really core foundational concepts, those are going to be, principles that are used for, for years to come or decades to come, even that, they're, they were actually, they were things that were done right originally, and Microsoft has built their entire platform around those things. So I think, like you said, being able to identify those patterns that have already been in use, and learning to think about things that particular way, I think
what I was looking for.
It informs how you're going to think about products like that in the future.
Yeah, the patterns. Thank you for that terminology.
Yeah,
that's exactly. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. So that, I think that is really an important aspect is, so in one of my prior lives, I also used to write exams. So if you've ever taken any of the Windows exams or the Exchange exams or things like that, you can thank me because I've probably written questions for those over the years. But one of the things that you learn when you're both writing books and writing exams that have questions that people have to answer is you learn how to think about the product from from the boundaries that it's already in. And once you really have that understanding of the product at that level, you understand what you can already kind of see ahead what the development constraints of the product might be until something really revolutionary happens. So you can understand how even tiny evolutions of the product aren't going to change fundamentally the way you administer it. So,
Great stuff.
Those I think those areas are really good to focus on, just so you can learn those best practices areas, and understand, and just to understand how the product works, so you can see how the product is going to work for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, Aaron, that's exactly the point I was stumbling to make, and you did very more than make up for my inadequacy on that. I think we're good. I don't want to hold people too long or have people feel that they are compelled to stay. We thank you all for hanging on for as long as you did. If there's any final word or final question, or you can put it in the chat, or you can always message us in the group, Microsoft 365 Meetup. We keep an active chat there. This also will be available online in our YouTube channel, a recorded version for you to send and share. But we can go ahead and end the recording and say goodnight unless there are objections. Or Nick, anything to add before we sign off?
No, I think you really hit it, Andy. Aaron and everyone else, thank you very much for joining us this evening and sticking around, and look forward to seeing everyone next month.
Awesome. Thank you guys for having me.
Take care, Aaron. Thanks so much, and thanks to Darryl as well.
All right. Bye.
Good night.